going to go ahead and get started. We might have a few other folks join us. Welcome to this. This is our first of the academic year 2012-2013 of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences Diversity Speaker Series. And my name is Kathy Leckman, and I am Leader of Diversity Development for the college. And I would just like to thank you and let you know that we are streaming this live. It's being viewed in Worcester, and people can log in from their computers. And given the chilliness of today, maybe some people have chosen to do that. Although I try not to share the link too soon, so I want to encourage people to come over. Because if you sit at your computer, you don't get all the goodies, the benefits of company. And we're also recording this for future viewing. Okay. So just to so you have that information. I'll introduce our speaker today. We are very pleased to have with us Dr. Thomas Blaine. He is from Russell, Kentucky, and he has 3 degrees from the University of Kentucky, BA in Political Science, MS in Marketing, and a PhD in Natural Resource Economics. He was a member of the graduate faculty at Texas A&M University before coming to OSU, so we are really fortunate to have him. And I will let him tell anything else that he wants to, like how we got into the topic of food deserts. I think we're in for a very good treat. I know that he's a very dynamic speaker, and we will turn it over to Tom.
Thanks, Kathy.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for coming on such a cold day. It's a real pleasure to be here. Glad to be here and share some of the work that I've done with my colleagues in the past few years on this topic of food deserts. I want to tell you that I got involved in this program at OARDC in Worcester. I work out of Worcester. And I know we're beaming up there to Worcester right now. Maybe there's some folks up there watching that I work with there. But at OARDC, we have a summer internship program called ORIP, Ohio Research Internship Program. And each summer we employ about 50 to 75 high-achieving students in this program. And Dr. Parwinder Grual heads it up. He's an entomologist. And this program is one that involves getting these students to do a research project. Now, many of these research projects are on soils and biology, but in recent years we've had some socioeconomic issues. And food deserts has become one of these that we've worked on. Now, they exist both in rural and urban settings. A food desert is a place where retail outlets are lacking in a place to buy healthy foods like fruits and vegetables. Some of these occur in urban areas and some in rural areas. And I think that's why Kathy had me come, because it's diversity here. I want to give you summaries of 2 studies I did with ORIP interns in 2009 in the city and then in 2012 in the country. Cleveland, Urban Gardens, and 2012, a rural area in Blaine and Holmes County, which is Amish country, and it's a very rural area. But similar to the urban area, you can go for miles out there without seeing a retail place where they sell fruits and vegetables. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with food deserts and the concept. I had not been familiar with it before, but I noticed that, like, in a lot of places in the inner city, you'll go and you'll see a convenience store, and you go in there, and on one shelf they've got potato chips and snacks and things like that. On another shelf they have donuts and things like that. And on the other shelf it's candy bars. And there's nothing healthy in there. There's no fruit, there's no veggies. Grocery stores are few and far between. Where are you going to get green peppers? Where are you going to get pears, bananas, peaches, tomatoes? It's difficult, and the folks that live in that community, it's hard for them to get to a place where you have that. Even though out in the country you might think it's different, because after all, that's agricultural, right? Food is produced in rural areas. But it's still a food desert, because the food that's produced there is more like feed, or food that's going to go into a system, an agricultural system. You know, we're talking livestock, right? That's going to go off to some warehouse for slaughtering. It's not going to be consumed locally. Fields and fields of agriculture out there, but it's grains that go into making bread and things. It is not really food. for local consumption. So it is a food desert because you're out there, you live in a community, you get in a car and drive for 5-6 miles, not one retail store where you can buy a green pepper or a pear, not one. So it's a food desert. So when you think about it, the places in the state that are not food deserts are mainly suburbia and small towns. Suburbia and small towns, because those have lots of grocery stores. And say what you want about grocery stores, whatever kind it is, they have a lot of fruits and vegetables to eat. So it's folks down in the inner city, and it's folks out in a very rural area, and that's diversity. I think that's what caught Kathy's eye. I had not thought about this in terms of diversity. Kathy called me, I sent out an email, and Kathy called me and said, this is a topic for diversity, because as I said before, at the bottom of that one, I want you to look at that again. These communities don't have much in common. The inner city of Cleveland and Amish country out there, but one thing they have in common is a paucity of availability of retail fresh fruits and veggies. Now I want to state also too, by the way, please feel free to stop me at any time. We'll have a question for Q&A, but it's also okay to raise your hand, and we can get started with conversations about any of these as we go along. Okay, so here's our 2009 group. Our ORIP interns that headed this up were Ashley Dahl. She's now in dental school at Case. Darren Snyder, now a student at University of Cincinnati. As you can see, Dr. Gruel, who heads up the program, and I were the mentors for this program. All right, so they go through this. This is their slideshow that they presented at the end of the summer. After having done the research, they present this. All the different interns from the teams get together and they present to each other. And then I've given this presentation nationally now a couple of times. And so I'm pleased to give it here today too. So we're going through here what they presented. I want you to see how they did this. I'm going to have to talk to you about community gardens. I don't know if you're familiar with these. Columbus has a lot. I know that Cleveland has about 220. Right down in the city, where they've had cleared out houses. Sometimes a house got foreclosed on, it was condemned. They tear it out, especially if there's 2 or 3 together. That's a nice plot, and they have a community garden there. You join up, Extension runs the program, and you sign up, you get a little plot, and you grow food, ornamental plants, right there on that plot. The objectives of the study that the students did in 2009 were pretty straightforward. They wanted to get behavioral information, demographics, who's gardening, who are the folks, what's a profile of the folks. Remember what we said here today, I was like, how do people cope with living in food deserts? Well, one way in the city here that we're talking about is community gardening. They join these gardens. You pay a fee, you get a plot, you get to grow your own food on there. You know, you have eggplant, tomatoes, all these things. That's a coping mechanism, so that's why we're doing this one. This was our first study on it. Now, what we wanted to do statistically, and we're going to do a lot of stats today. You guys like statistics, right? It'll be all right. It'll be okay, because the charts have nice colors and stuff. But it'll be fun. We'll go through what they really mean. I'm an applied statistician, so we're going to apply this. What we wanted to ask was, you know, does community garden promote real significant life changes for these folks? Remember, these are folks that don't have access really readily to local foods, that, you know, healthy foods. And we want to know if having a garden will promote changes in their diet, long-term behavior, social patterns, and so forth like that. Okay, so we had a survey. It had 23 questions. We came up with it. Focused mainly on these information categories that we have for our study. We contacted Extension in Cuyahoga County to get a list. We got 800 names. We had a sample of 400 gardeners randomly selected from there. And here's our procedure. We conducted the survey, put the results into SPSS, a statistical package for the social sciences, and we ran it to get our results. And here's the way this overall looked. We had 390 actually out of the 400 were usable. When you get a big list like that, there's cancellations, people have left. So we had 390 out of the 400. we had 81 folks refuse to talk to us. That's a problem in sampling research that you always see. 98 actually disconnected. Apart from the 390 that we had, we got all the way down to 98. Others that we lost, we had total number of surveys 124 for a response rate of 32%. So just keep that in mind on that 32% response rate. Here we're getting into some stats, but I want you to keep that in mind, because when you do a study, and many of you may be involved in studies, your constituents or clientele, and you call them on the phone, and you send out a letter, you want to know what the response rate is going to be. That's a pretty standard number. I review a lot of papers for journals, academic journals, and that's a number that we see quite a bit, in the low 30s. One of the questions that comes about when you do this, a validity question, is, are the respondents, are the 32% that responded similar to the ones that didn't respond, the 68%? There may be a difference, and if there is, that's non-response bias. You have no guarantee that the people who responded are like everybody else. Maybe they're different. For example, maybe the ones that responded are all excited about the community garden. The ones that didn't respond, I don't like gardening that well, I wish I hadn't signed. So now you're going to get biased results. All right? These are not only important for this, these are also the kinds of things we're teaching our OREP interns. Remember, these are kids, undergraduates or high school students. So we're teaching them this as we go, because they may do surveys in the future. And I want you to just keep that in mind here. Late response bias, non-response bias is a potential, and the lower the response rate is, the higher the potential. If you get a 96% response rate, non-response is not a problem, period. As you get down below 50, it becomes a very serious potential problem. Okay, here's some results already. See, I told you it wouldn't be too bad to look at this, these stats, right? Look at they put this sideways. Ashley was very creative, our dentistry student. I told her, in the journal when this came out, I did it vertically. I turned it around. I didn't like this, but we had a 14-year-old respondent, believe it or not. Isn't that funny? We had 14 to 19 was a few kids. These are percentages. As you can see, the peak age group's in the 50s. It's kind of a normal curve. Look at this. We had some octogenarians. Is that surprising to you that the distribution looks like that? One of the things we concluded is, hey, right there off the bat, we've got a result. Guess what? Community garden appeals to all ages. Appeals to all. There's your result right there. It appeals to all ages. It's true that it peaks out up here. A lot of folks in their 70s. 50s is the peak, but still, it's not dominating, because look at all the people in their 40s. Some people in 30s, here's people, you know, hectic, running around, going to school, finishing up their masters, whatever, maybe starting a family. They're not doing it, but then they come back. Hours spent per week in the garden. Now check it out. The most common is to spend less than 5 hours. You got a little plot, you can go down there and spend 45 minutes, you know, 3 to 4 days a week. You're in the less than 5 hours group. About a third are like that. They might go an hour, 4 days a week. But look here, we've got some diehards, 20 or more hours. It's like a half-time job, you know. That's about 12% too. That's not a real tiny chunk. So we can see we have got some distribution here. And one of the things we want to ask is, why is there variation here? This is what I think as a statistician. So I told you that applied stats isn't going to be too bad. Don't you want to know, why are a lot of people down here and some people are up here? What's making these people tick? And that's what we're going to get into as a measure of commitment to gardening, as a measure of how involved you are in gardening. Well, one thing was income. Look at hours worked based on income. Check that out. This is a theme we're going to come back to a lot in this today. This is a finding that permeates both studies that I think is very interesting. Low-income folks spend more time in the garden. High-income folks spend less time in the garden. Now, I used to do a lot of work back in the 80s and 90s on this phenomenon. about how high-income folk versus low-income folk use their time. If you're a high-income person, if you're an attorney making $100 an hour, you go down to the garden and work an hour, you're giving up $100 per hour that you're down there. If you're making $8 an hour, it's costing you $8 an hour to work in the garden, time off of work. Right, your opportunity cost of time for low-income folks is just low. If you're a physician, a surgeon, something like that, it's expensive for you to go work in the garden. This is economics, opportunity cost, and you can see this is showing up here. Now, we do have some high-income folks, so I do want to say, community gardens bring diverse people together. What do I mean? We showed age diversity. We are showing income diversity. There is income diversity, after all. 20% of our gardeners make $80,000 and above. That's a fifth of our gardeners make $20,000 and above. There's a noticeable gap here. What is this gap? This is kind of the upper middle income. They're working hard to get that, to try to make that, to get into the very high class. And so there they are. They don't have a leisure time. Some of these folks have achieved and might have that now. They can turn the practice over to their assistants, go garden. Here, low-income folks, their opportunity cost of time is very low. They can get out there and work. And, frankly, providing their own food gives them affordability on that food. If you're high income, you can afford to go to the store and buy as many green peppers or peaches as you want to buy. So I think this slide is extremely important, but it does show that the community garden is bringing people from diverse incomes together. You could be sitting there hoeing the garden and you're making $18,000 a year, and the person right next to you is making $150,000 a year. We're seeing that. These are results. This is why statistics is important, because you've got to be able to show these. If we're going to make claims that community gardens bring people together, diverse people together, we ought to be able to show it. And that means statistics, and that's why I'm giving you a lot of stats. Veggies, number one by far. In fact, everybody grew veggies, 100% of people. Fruits, we had 73%. A lot of people grow flowers. I was surprised when I went down to the gardens. I was like, well, they're doing ornamental. They want the garden to look nice, you know. This was mainly about fruits and veg, mainly about food desert, right? But half the people, 49% of the people, grow flowers. They have their rounding outer ring flowers. And pardon?
It's not just to make it pretty, but a lot of the plants work well with fruits and vegetables because it helps with aphids and that sort of thing.
As I told you, I'm glad you mentioned it, Parwinder Gruel, our head of orbit, is an entomologist. And he did tell me that. He said, you know, I said, wow, they spend a lot of time making these flowers look good in the gardens. And he said, well, it has implications for pest management too.
Yeah, marigolds are really good for them.
Okay, good. So that's where a lot of that was. I was surprised at the herbs. Between a fifth and a fourth grow herbs. Okay, we asked people about their food, their intake of food, and this is going to be in both surveys too. This I thought was really fascinating. How many servings of fruits and veggies do you eat a day? Excuse me, two servings of fruit, 3 veggies. Okay, these results I thought were very specific and something that were kind of revealed a lot. The gardeners, let's go to the bottom one first. Those who've been gardening more than a year already made a harvest. You've already made a harvest. 74% stated that their diets had changed as a result of community gardening. Have you started eating more fruits and veggies since you did community gardening? 3/4 said yes. So, about 1/4 said no, I used to just go to the store and get it, now I grow it, but it's the same. But 3/4 are eating more fruits and veggies. So this is showing us, and now you say, all right, is that really valid? Is that really just people just talking? But look, those who are in their first year haven't harvested yet. And we asked them, these are separate now. Do you think, now that you're gardening, you haven't harvested your first year, do you think it's going to change your diet to eating more fruit? And 71%. Notice that those are essentially the same number. So I think we got something to go on here in saying that yes, remember those, the store with the donuts and the candy bars and all that, maybe participating in this is going to get people to change from that kind of stuff to this kind of stuff. Again, That's why I wanted to have these results. Okay, so now we ran a regression. A regression is an equation that specifies a dependent variable as a function of a bunch of independent variables. Our dependent variables, I indicated to you, was in the slide a while back. Activity in the garden. Hours spent weekly as a measurement of gardening activity. How much are you gardening? We want to show what is it that determines why do some people spend 2 hours in the garden and somebody spends 18. And so we put in as variables years of gardening, how long you've been in the program. Household income, we've already seen that that's probably negative. Veggie servings consumed a day. If you donate produce or not, because a lot of people donate, and early and late response. Remember, I told you that we wanted to ask the question whether our respondents were similar to people that didn't respond. How are you going to know? Because those people never responded. Well, one way to do it is you conduct your survey in waves. You call a bunch of people. Some people hang up on you. Some people say, call me later, etc. So you write down how many you had. You might have had 60 some that cooperated. Then you go back and start calling the people that said, call me later or whatever. And you got those in a wave. You code the one early and you code the one late. There's some literature that suggests that people who respond late, who didn't want to respond initially, are like the people that never did respond. Because they're kind of in that direction. The people that respond very quickly, are, like I said, are likely to be the more excited about the program and all this kind of thing. And the people said, I don't want to mess with this, are being left out. But you need to get some of those folks to determine if that's an issue for your survey. So we did that. And here's the way the results came out. Now, these are coefficients, and basically they show for every 1 unit change in the independent variable, how much is the dependent variable changing. So, for example, years in the program is 0.24. Now, that's highly statistically significant, 0.003, so we're 99% sure that that's different from 0. What does the 0.24 mean? It means that for every 1 additional year that you've spent gardening, you spend 0.24 hours, that's a quarter of an hour, that's 15 minutes a week more in the garden. For every 1 additional year, you spend 15 minutes. So somebody's been gardening 10 years, let's say. As opposed to somebody's just started. They're spending 2.5 hours more per week in the garden. Now that's an important thing. Because remember when I showed you our objectives? Remember those? I know I've gone through these quickly, but we said, does it promote life changes? Life changes. And we're showing here that with increasing years, there's more commitment to the gardening. The people that have been in the program longer spend more time in the garden per week. So that is suggestive that, yeah, it's promoting life changes. So again, this column right here shows statisticals. The lower these numbers, the more statistically significant they are. Anything below 0.05 is considered statistically significant, and that's all these. Everything on here is statistically significant. These are signs. These are parameters. The signs show the direction. This is positive, so more years gardening, more time you spend per week. Look at the household income. It's negative. So, and those were in categories. So that means that, as your category went up from like in $20,000 increments, your time in the gardens fell about an hour and a half. 1.5 is an hour and a half, a little over an hour and a half. Maybe, 93 minutes a week less for every income increase of $20,000. And we already saw that in the bar chart I gave you because that one stood out so strongly. Donate produce. Check this out. Those people who donate produce spend over 4 hours per week more in the garden. That's showing me that a lot of the motivation for people down here in the garden is to give food away, is to give it to the food bank, the food shelters. And I think about a third of the people that garden give produce to the food shelter and food banks. So it's not just for their own consumption or their family's consumption. There's quite a lot of that going on, and it's very highly associated with spending more time in the garden. Vegetable servings, here we go. As your vegetable intake, remember we asked them how many servings of veggies do you eat a day? As that goes up by 1 unit, 1 serving, somebody might have 3 servings, somebody might have 4 servings, somebody 5. As it goes up 1 unit per day on that veggie serving, you spend 3/4 of an hour, that's about 45 minutes more in the garden. So, veggie consumption is positively associated with gardening. Now look at our early and late response. I thought this was really very striking. Check that out. What we had here was a situation where, look at that, negative 3.64. That means the people that answered late, that only answered after when we called and got them going a second time or third time, they spent 3.6 hours less in the garden, which confirmed my suspicions. I want to go back to this. This is the variable that we're running the regression on. This is the variable we're explaining with all those other ones. Hours spent per week in the garden. In other words, a lot of the people who answered early spend more time, over 3 hours more. The people that didn't really want to respond at first, like I was suspecting, are people that don't spend as much time down there, but we finally got it out of them. And that allowed us to say that these numbers here generally slightly overstate the actual hours. And we corrected that in our study to show that the average number of hours is not quite as great as this because we do have some late response bias. But now we know what that is and we can correct for it. And anyway, the late response bias notwithstanding, it doesn't affect these results on income, veggie servings. None of these things are affected, but what it does affect is the overall average of how many hours do you spend in the garden a week. And it's an interesting methodological issue too, that when we do these surveys, don't just rely, if you get a low response rate, don't rely on that. You need to go back and survey non-respondents. Okay, so they did a discussion. They dug up a study, these kids did, Ashley and Darren, of a study from '06, and that had been done. That one showed, for example, that 80% of the gardeners were females and some of the things like that. We showed, we found out that either that's changed, either there's more gender equality now in the gardens, or maybe that study wasn't done too well. It only had 21 people, so I'm pretty suspicious of it. We try to have a good end. You can't hardly generalize too well with a low end like that. So we felt like we gave them a lot more reliable information, that your garden's probably not as, maybe it changed in time, but probably not. You do have more females. There's no question about that. But it's not hugely different. We got our average age, the hours worked was 10. Again, we brought that down because remember on our first wave we did it and it was about 13 and a half. But then we realized, okay, it's got to come down because non-respondents bring it down. Our survey was biased in that sense a little bit. And so it's 10 hours, but that's still a lot more than they had. They had an average of only 4.5, and that is clearly low. Half of the people that work there have an average income below $40,000. We did mode of transportation. Remember, this is in the city, and over half the people walk to the gardening plot. Mode of transportation. And it's like I was saying, you know, down in the inner city, you can go down there, and it might not be geographically real far to a grocery store. You know, it might be 2 miles, 3 miles. We might not think about that too much, but if you don't have a car, that's difficult to get shopping. And so I was a little surprised, but 53% walk. It might be a few blocks, might be 10, 12 blocks, might be a block and a half, but most people do walk. A majority of people walk to their garden plot. Okay, so our conclusions that we had from this '09 study from Cleveland: gardens bring people together. These community gardens do. Wide range of income, with different gender, age groups. We've shown that now. Diversity here in the gardens, significant. Participating in this promotes life changes. The longer people be gardening in a program, the more time they spend on that plot. it changes their diets. New folks expecting it's going to change their diet. People that have been around say it's changed my diet. That's pretty strong proof that it's promoting these things, dietary changes, hours spent, and donating produce also. We feel that's an important community objective, very important community impact of these gardens is the donation of produce, because those food banks and food shelters up there help a lot of folks. And here they got references. They did a nice job. You know, it's a scholarly study. It's a lot of our students, it's the first time they've really done a study of this nature. And they thanked Parwinder, they thanked me. They had some other teammates, a couple of other students who assisted them with this. Here's our county extension folks up there. Marie Barney is county chair. Is Marie chair? Marie's the chair in Cuyahoga. She helped us a lot get the names of on the list. We went and presented this to Marie and her group. We thanked the gardeners. We made all this study available, all the gardeners. They posted up results on all the gardens where people could see the charts and all that kind of stuff. Okay, 012 came along in Parwinder. Dr. Gruel came to me and said, we got to do another study this summer. This time we got to focus to the rural food deserts. I'm like, rural food desert? We just did urban. He said, yeah, but these rural, go out there and drive around and look. So I did. It's not far from where I live. And we had two students, this time a brother and sister team. She just graduated from college. He just graduated from high school. And we worked on this rural food desert study. So that, again, back to diversity, you can't get much more opposite than this in Ohio, from inner city Cleveland out to the middle of Amish country. And yet folks are faced with a similar thing, which is a paucity of local retail opportunities to buy healthy food. Get in the car and drive out there for 8 or 10 miles, not one single grocery store, maybe a convenience store, gas station, again, where they sell the candy bars and the donuts. Okay, so they talked about the importance of what a food desert is. Some of these things, they did a lot of citations. Look at all this stuff in previous studies, literature review. We're teaching them research methods here. Okay, we want to find out, how do these folks in a rural food desert acquire, produce, and consume fresh fruits and veggies, and find out whether demographic factors influence all this stuff. Now, they put out their hypotheses. Look at this. Residents of these food deserts will have garden. Now, that big difference, the folks in the inner city don't have a big land plot. Okay, so they go to the community gardens. These folks, there's a lot of land. That's why it's like ironic, well, there's a lot of land. Okay, but that means they can have their own garden at home. Gardeners, people who garden, will consume more produce than non-gardeners. Large households likely to have a garden. Households with higher, look at that. We learned that from the other study, and I told these kids, I said, you know what? I'll bet you anything that we find that high-income households are less likely to have a garden. Because if you drive into Worcester to work as a physician or a surgeon or an engineer or an architect, your time is you're not going to come home and garden. You're less likely to anyway. Households that farm. Again, they're out there farming households, but they're not producing food. They're producing grain crops, but they have agricultural knowledge. And that's one of the things about in the city, you know, you wouldn't really expect folks in the city to have a lot of agricultural knowledge. But getting in that program, they acquire it, and they acquire it fast. Folks out here, somebody that's a farm family, the dad's a farmer, he might have dairy, wheat, corn. That's agricultural knowledge. So there's a good chance they have a garden. So we did a survey, and you know, we asked these folks, how much produce do you consume? All these kinds of things. Where do you get it? Do you farm? All the questions necessary to answer the kinds of hypotheses that we just specified were on the survey. That's a postcard we sent out. The kids designed a postcard. And this is the front. This was the front here, and then this was the back. So they got a picture of OARDC. This is the old administration building. Anybody been to OARDC? Okay. The flowers, they do that every spring, spells it out. Hillside. Parwinder's office in Thorn Hall is just to the left of this, but we found this online. We put it on a postcard. Nice glossy finish. And on the other side, a letter from me. OSU researchers, et cetera, et cetera. We're doing this study. We'll call you within a week. And we got these names, by the way, on this one. Recall the other one we got from Extension. They sent us a list of all the community gardeners, but these aren't community gardeners. So we went to America List, and I would strongly urge you, if you're going to do a general survey in your community, you got to get a mail list. One of these firms like America List does a really good job. They'll give you what you want. They'll give you the kinds of households. If you say I want households like this, that, or the other, they'll give it to you. We got it in 4 zip codes along the Wayne-Holmes border, very rural area, not much retail. I think in the whole region there's a grocery store. One grocery store that's kind of relatively small, and it's very limited hours. And even for many of the people that live out there, it's not very close. We had 209 rural residents, it says. So we sent this out, and then we started our calls. We phoned 209 people, or we intended to. We had 25 bad numbers. They gave 184, 20 refused. I thought that was interesting. There wasn't a very high refusal rate compared to the community gardeners. Maybe it's a city folk, country folk thing. Don't bother me. It was sort of like, oh, okay. We had, look at the response. Remember the other one? Who remembers the other response rate? Did you fall asleep? 32%. All right. Statistics aren't that bad. 32. Look at this one. This is high. This is a high response rate. Like I say, not just compared to that one, but I review a lot of studies, and 32, 34 is a pretty normal thing. When you get about 49, I've got a colleague of mine, he is very strict, and he wants 70. And I like doing research with him because he gets 70. And that's because he sends out 2 or 3 of those postcards and then offers all kinds of things like a raffle, and he's just very thorough, and he gets high response rates. But I was pretty pleased with this. Here's our age distribution of the people, that we surveyed in this. Remember we had a 14-year-old gardener in the community garden? We had a 16-year-old here. We surveyed some people in their 80s. So again, see, it's kind of a normal curve. It peaks around 49. These are number of respondents at each age group. So 34, you had like 2. These might be percentages, but percentage is going to be very close to the end here because we had roughly 100 respondents. But that's our age distribution of the people that we talked to. Here's our income distribution. It's slightly skewed. You have a lot of lower middle income folks out there. Just a few people in a very high income category. The peak is in the median. So there's middle class, middle income folks. Household size, these are percentages. We had a lot of people with 2 in the house was the most common. Typically a man and wife, not a lot of empty nesters out there. Might be people, 55, 60 years old, kids are gone. We had a very, very large family. Some here that are quite large. It's all distributed through here. Now, we asked them, how far do you have to go to get your produce? And the average answer was 11 miles. Now, we calculated this based on the IRS's 55 cents. What is OSU's, what is our reimbursement now? It's 55. So, because that's what the IRS gives. IRS says it costs you 55 cents a mile to operate your vehicle. So we say, okay, 55 cents, it's 11 miles. How many times do you go to buy produce per year? And it came out to be $735 a year is your transport cost to and from to get your produce. That's the consequence of living in a rural food desert. Okay, now check this out. We asked them about their meal. What kind of meals do you eat? We want to get very specific this time about your meals. We gave them chances on 4 meals. And we said, all right, do you eat no meal at all for that? And notice, really, I think that the only one where anybody didn't eat anything is breakfast. Well, no, I'm sorry, snacks. Somebody about to catch me on that one. Everybody eats lunch and dinner, right? With snacks, about 20% don't eat a snack, ever, or generally. About 11% don't eat breakfast. These are small meals in the red, so, when you look at dinner, the most common thing to do on dinner is to have a small dinner. If you look at breakfast, about half the folks eat a small breakfast. Help me out, was I on the snacks?
You're on the stand.
Go ahead and correct me on that. What happened? See, I told you I'd get you into the stats one way or the other.
Less people eat a large breakfast, more people eat a small breakfast. That's the higher rate.
All right. And what's that one sticking up there real high on the,
More people eat a small snack.
okay, a small snack is very common, isn't it? Look at that. Almost 80% say, yeah, I eat a small snack pretty much every day. Yeah.
How are those defined? Like the small, medium, and large?
Mm-hmm. We let them define it.
Okay, so it's their perception.
Yes, and here's why we did it. I wanted to do this. Here, Kathy, here's why I wanted to do, when we designed this thing, what we're trying to get at here is some kind of measure of people's eating habits, and then also their fruit and veggie intake. Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of do this for a living, and I still don't really know exactly what a serving is. If I have some green beans at dinner and somebody asks me, was it a serving or 2 serving? Because it goes by a certain amount. When you look at USDA, who else does? FDA, USDA, Centers for Disease Control, they do all this thing on servings. And I'm not sure what I know. I drink a lot of orange juice at brunch. I drink a lot of OJ. And somebody told me, well, that counts as a fruit serving. Now, I drink like a quart. So it's like, that's 3 fruit servings. But I wouldn't know that, you know what I mean, or how to count that. So we didn't ask them about servings. We said, okay, in your opinion, the size of your meals, would you call it none, small, medium, and large, and let them. But I would say that's probably, even though it's subjective, it's probably less subjective than asking them about servings because they don't know what servings are. That's why I did this. And we're going to see how this morphs into an index. We're going to let this morph into an index of fruit and veggie consumption that I think you're going to really think is kind of interesting. I thought was interesting. Okay, so the most common thing on dinner is medium. A lot of people say, I ate a medium dinner. But you look at the variation here, and you see probably people took this seriously, or we wouldn't have got this variation. The fact that, 20% said, I never eat a snack, essentially. And, 11% said, I really never eat breakfast. And then we have some of those on the large breakfast. A tiny percent say they eat a large breakfast. And, okay, so dinner, the large dinner is about 30%. Is that correct? Now, what we did with this was we said, okay, the meal size, we're going to code 0 for none, 1 for small, 2 for medium, and 3 for large. We're going to code that like that. Then we asked them, okay, on each one of these meals, what percentage of this meal is fruit and veggies? See, now, I think people can get around, they can say small, medium, or large. And then we say, okay, what percentage is, fruits and veggies? So if somebody would say, well, my snack is none. I just eat popcorn, or I eat, I eat potato chips, or I eat donuts, whatever. Somebody else might say, it all is. My snack is banana and a green pepper. Or my dinner is about a third, because I have a little thing of meat, green beans, or a salad, or whatever. So they told us then what those percentages were on each meal. Now, based on that, we calculated an index. So, like, for example, at one extreme of the index would be 12. If you eat a large snack, large breakfast, large lunch, right? Large all the way across. And it's 100% fruits and veggies. Okay, that would be our theoretical max, would be 12. Because we're on 4, right? 4 different meals. And then we're multiplying that out times the percentage, we get a number of 12. 0 would be if you don't ever eat any, like whatever size of your meal. All right, now, so if you eat a medium meal that's like 40%, you multiply those together, and you get this. And so your range on consumption of fruits, how much fruit and veggie consumption do you have, would theoretically, the minimum would be 0, the maximum would be 12. Now, our actual range in the sample came out because nobody says, well, I just eat fruits and veggies and very large meals. Nobody did that. But with the highest we had, but we did have a 0. So 0 to 5. Do you want to see the outcome? It's more statistics. It's a graph though. There's the consumption that we got. This is the way it came out. So you can see, here's a person that was the 5. Remember I told you somebody eats 5. They eat a lot. Either they eat a large meals, or it's a high percentage, or both. So people down here, somebody didn't eat any. Look here, this is an index. It's just purely a dimensionless index, not number of servings. But if you multiply it times some kind of average on servings, you could convert it to servings. But I wasn't really interested in doing that. I just wanted an index of fruit and veggie consumption. And so you can see in here, we peak, that's like a normal curve. People in the middle, and then people at the extremes. That's kind of what we would get. Now why? Well, we're going to do something with that here. We ran a regression. Remember what a regression is. A regression is an equation that specifies a dependent variable, in this case, produce consumption, as a function of a bunch of independent variables. Why does this vary? Why does this person eat a lot of these fruits and veggies, and this person doesn't eat? Why? You run a regression that is an equation that will tell you factors associated with it and whether they're statistically significant or not. And check out how this came out. Gender came out with the negative. We coded men as a 1, women a 0, and it's a negative 0.42. That means on average on that scale, right here on that scale, men tend to be about 0.4% less shifted down. Women tend to be up on this side. Men, so that's a contributing factor into why there's variation, is gender. And it's statistically seen out. These did not always come out below 0.05. 0.05 is a number that means you're 95% sure that it didn't come out by chance. We're close here. We're at 0.06. And sometimes research comes out like that. There's maybe we need to do more study on this, but right now it suggests that it's likely to be like this. The next one is not close. It is highly statistically significant. It's 0.03, and that's the folks that have a garden consume more. If you have a garden, yes or no, I raise some of my own fruits and veggies in a garden. Half on the index, whoops, that would raise you from here to here. Or it would raise you from here to, it would raise you a half, no matter where you are on here. The fact that you have a garden, it matters. In the food desert, you're producing your own. Yeah, you could get in the car and go to Worcester or one of those other towns, and Loudonville. It's a long way, but the gardening does matter. Income, look at income. Higher income folks consume more. Now, higher income folks are less likely to have a garden. They're less likely to engage in gardening. But it's not statistically significant, but it is positive. It's suggestive. Again, we need a larger sample size on this one to find this out. But why would that be the case? Higher income people have more options, generally. You know, they don't have as much free time, that's for sure. But they do have more options, fruits and veggies. You know, if they want to go and spend a lot of money, if they want to drive frequently to get fruits, and they can do it. And it did come out positive. So we got a graph here, and I thought this was, you like these colors? It makes statistics less boring. I told you that it would, right? The students did these graphs. This was Sarah and Michael did these because they have good visual acuity and like good taste in colors. I like the way they did this. But check this out. These are percent deviation from the mean. So it's predicted produce consumption. What's the profile of somebody that's eating a lot of produce? A female gardener in a high income category. Check that out. You want to see somebody in our survey that's eating a lot of fruits and veggies? It's a female gardener in a high income category. Who's eating the least? The male, no garden, low income category is nearly 40% less than average person in consumption of fruits and veggies. This is not good because we're all kind of saying, you know, eating fruit and veggies is an important thing. Look at even some of these, you can see even with a garden. Let's check out the males in middle income with a garden. Help me find that. The male gardener, look here, a male gardener in the middle income consumes less fruits and veggies than a female gardener in the low income. You see what I'm saying? The fact that she's a woman and the fact that she has a garden overrides the fact that he's got more income. She's still eating more fruits and veggies. And that's considerable. Doesn't look like a lot, but I mean, we're talking like 10 and maybe 13% more on that. So I like this chart. That's kind of giving you a profile of who's eating what. Did I get those? I'm getting better at practice on this since the other graph. Are those, you checked me out on that, was that right? Anybody have any questions? Nobody's interrupting my talk today. Yeah.
I got a couple questions. So one is is the income spread for the rural group the same as the income spread for the...
The income distributions?
Yeah.
They were similar. Yeah, they were similar. The income spreads were very similar. Let me just see if we've got that here. Do we have the income on this group?
Yeah, it was very close.
Okay. This is household income of everybody we surveyed. Does that mean, remember, the thing is, in Cleveland, a little bit different in the study, the only people in Cleveland that we surveyed were people who engage in the community gardens. Does that make sense? So everybody, by definition, in that one was a gardener, okay? Because we knew that they were, and what we wanted to do was find out, you know, what's the profile of the folks, and there was plenty of deviation among them in terms of how much do you garden, right? So we wanted to get that. So I gave you the income distribution of the gardeners. Here's the income distribution of everybody we surveyed. Here, I don't know, you can take a look at that and see what you think. And let's go hunt that down and find out our income on the community gardeners back in Cleveland. See,
Well, it ranged from 0 to 80,000 plus.
Did it really?
This one went up to 100,000 plus. So there's $20,000 difference.
well, that was our categories, but what we want to do is look and see the numbers in the categories, right? Okay, what you can see here, like these were just the categories though. In other words, these folks up here, some of them were over 100 too. We just lined up the categories differently. These two, we've got 5 here. Do you recall how, did we just have 5 categories on the other one? Or did we have 6? We had 6, did we divide that up into 6 categories? This one we did 5 categories of incomes. And that one we did 6. But yeah, I think they're similar in the sense that you can see the peak is over here to the left. You see what I'm saying? You got a lot of low income or low, and then a middle, and then, you know, it goes down. But we did have quite a number of high income folks, but these are gardeners. These aren't everybody in the community, and the other one's everybody in the community. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One is, I would like to know the percentage of older people with low income and younger people with low income and their gardening habits.
Higher income, low income.
Older people with low income.
Yes.
Younger people with low income and their gardening habits.
Okay. Hopefully we can get to some of that. We're getting ready to talk about that a little
Because
bit.
I can see where there could be a discrepancy in, you know, like, somebody could challenge the data saying that older people, they may not garden as many hours because they aren't physically capable.
Right.
But then you could also say that older people have not as much to do, but so, because the perception is that lower income is younger people.
But that's not necessarily true.
Right, but when you made that comment, you said that people who are retired have over 80 or doctors or whatever. So you alluded to that in your the way you
No, what I was saying was, I think that what I was talking about in here was comparing these two groups. Both of these two, I wasn't really comparing these so much to these. in comparing these to all these, basically people up in here have a lot of income, but many of them don't have much time because they are still working. In other words, somebody up in here is almost certainly still working because even high-income retired folks don't make this kind of money. So these folks are still where they're not retired. All right?
They're still gardening as much as the low income.
Not quite. If you look at people here, see these folks right here? And some of these folks are slightly higher. See how some of these guys are above the line here?
Right. I'm saying, but it's, if you're saying average hours, 10 to 8 a week is not a whole lot, considering somebody with low income and someone high income. 10 and 8 hours is pretty.
They're pretty similar in your mind. Okay. And I think that, well, let's just see what that result came out on that regression. Okay, here's the way it came out. For every 1 unit increase, it's about an hour and a half overall based on the regression. So that 1.5. Okay, so this would indicate that on average for all of these, this would be 1.5. Then you're at 3, 4.5. And then this would be, on average, the regression is telling us this is about 6 hours more than this one. Is what the regression is telling us, the statistical. Now, it might not appear like that on the chart because these are averages. And this is a pairwise comparison that just compares hours working with income. And the regression allows other things to enter in. And so it's telling us that what would this be like? Is this like a 12 and this is an 8? So that's only 4, right? Is that saying that's 4 hours difference?
Yeah. I guess my main comment was I'd like to see the age of the people in the low income. If it's, who is really the low income? Is it young people or is it the old people?
We did not find an interaction between age and income. When we looked at the relationship between age and income, there was not a relationship. In other words, in this low income, you've got seniors, you've got 50-somethings, and you've got 20-somethings.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay.
I didn't present, I don't have that graph, but because we're, you can compare all of these things, and they matter. If they are related, you need to point that into a regression that allows those to interact. But we did not have a relation. For example, a lot of the folks in here are retired, so they might be in the 70s or 60s. A lot of these folks in here, they might be in their 30s. They may be, they don't have a job, or they don't have a high-paying job. They're making $9 an hour, $8.50 an hour, something like that. But these were distributed as well. You had some people here in their 30s, even, believe it or not, and some people in their 60s. So they were spread out. But what I was saying was, in comparing these, this is where I found an interesting, because your incomes are similar here, but look how different. This is where you have a difference. Even though the incomes are similar, you would expect them to be more similar than, say, look, this one compared to these is more similar than it is to right here. And what I was saying was, I think a lot of these folks are trying to break in, either upwardly mobile, like a younger physician who's like 38, 40, may not be making as much money as a physician that's 58, whose practice is well established or something like that. But I'm kind of guessing about that because we really didn't have an interaction overall.
Could it be 2 income households versus 1?
Absolutely, that could make a huge difference. Somebody we didn't ask how many incomes you have. If you have one person in the house making $80,000, and then a spouse that doesn't work outside the home, that person could be working a lot in the garden. That could be doing. That could be it. That could be it. Yes, that could be a very important factor. But just like that could happen here, that could happen here. So we don't know exactly, but I'm just guessing or suspecting. But in any case, what the regression showed was this. While this doesn't look all that pronounced, this how many hours you work in a garden as your income goes up, that is very important. these are above and this below the line, and then when we take into account all the factors, this statistic, 1.58 for every income category you go up, an hour and a half less in the garden, and it's so statistically significant that it really is an important thing. Yes, we have community gardeners from the high income folks, but low income folks on average spend more time in the garden, and I think it's because they have more time to spend. And we're going to see that right about now in when we get back to the rural area. I want to show you that. Do we have any other questions right now?
I just
Yeah.
have one
Okay.
off topic.
Okay.
So, okay, so you had fruits and vegetables.
Mhm.
From my experience, most fruits take longer to grow.
Okay.
Most vegetables are annuals and most fruits are perennials.
Yes.
So, in these gardens, did they grow strawberries or?
They had some of those berry. We had a list on one of our charts on what they had. The leading crop grown in both the country and the city, the community garden, you know what it was, right? It was tomatoes. And so I don't know, what is tomato? You know, I'm in a college of agriculture, I'm embarrassed. But I told you I'm an economist, I'm masquerading. Oh, so it is a fruit. Okay, so if that's the case, then that gets your fruit number. It's not a necessarily
If
a
they
perennial.
considered that, but most people would put a tomato with a green pepper. They wouldn't put a tomato with a pear.
Yeah, right. And it's cool because that's why I always say fruits and vegetables. If you notice, it's like they're all my regression is fruits and F and V, right? We saw my F and V.
But you had them separated.
Yeah, we do because they ask us to do that. But as a food group, USDA, they're the same, aren't they? The food group is the same food group.
We want you to have, 7 servings of fruits.
Fruits and vegetables is a food group, dairy's a food group, right? These are all, so I don't really, but I mean, it's important, it's cool, but that's the way that we handle that. And I guess a lot of people might have answered the tomatoes because it was by far and away the #1 crop. I guess it's just easy to have a good tomato crop here in Ohio, maybe. Climate or the soils. There's the household income. We went to 6. We wanted a little bit more clarity. Here's the deal in survey research. To get more specific, you would ask somebody, what's your annual income? And just write down the number. Why not do that instead of a category? Statistically, it's a lot better to have the number. Because here, somebody that's making 41 is lumped in with somebody making 58. When the truth is, their purchasing power is more similar to somebody making 38, isn't it? And yet, so you see how that kind of means that your results are probably not going to be as good. But you know what happens when you go to asking open-ended income questions? Do you know what happens to your survey? You get a low response. Sometimes people throw the whole thing out or they just skip it. Now you can't analyze it at all. All right, so here's the thing. You have more categories. But as you have more categories, it starts to hone in kind of like what they were suspecting, they throw it out. So it's like, how many do you have? 5? Yeah, so we were a little bit aggressive on this. We went with 6. We still had a good response rate, so I'm happy that we had 6. But I think the incomes were similar, on that. Here's our produce factors that influence produce consumption. Again, this was all fruits and veggies. All that. This is how we just asked, percentage of fruits and veggies. We weren't really getting into specifically what they had. Is that where we are?
Yeah, go ahead. That one. That's
Okay, so we asked people, okay, do you have a garden? Do you have does your household have a garden? And then when they said yes, those that said yes, and it was 74% said yes, what we did was we said, okay, do you preserve any of this? We asked them a few questions on how much do you eat throughout the year of what you grew? How much do you eat in January from what you grew in the summer? February, we asked them by month. We asked them a lot of detailed questions. And based on that, we already had their index of how much they consume. Remember that? So based on that, we were able to figure out the percentage of all the fruits and veggies they eat that they grew versus how much they bought in the store. And we called that self-sufficiency. And we found out that based on this, the average self-sufficiency was 22%. Now look over here, zero self-sufficiency. These are people that didn't have a garden at all. Okay, we had a big spike because those folks did not have a garden. And we come out here, somebody was over 80% self-sufficient. They're serious about gardening. They freeze it a lot or can it and eat it all through the year and hardly buy anything. But that's just one person. Look out here, somebody's 60-some, 60, somebody's 50% self-sufficient. A lot of people in the 40s and 30s, look at that. And so the average was 22. Here's your average right down in here. 43% grow at least a fourth. That's boom, all the way down to here. This is 43% of the sample grow at least a fourth of what they consume and achieve that kind of self-sufficiency. Okay, now when we asked them though on, do you have a garden or not? We ran a regression on that because we had to figure out, okay, just like with the community gardeners, what were the factors? Now what are the factors associated with the people in the rural food desert? Who's having the garden and who's not having the garden? Gender was not significant. The negative means the males were, the male respondents were slightly less likely, but it's really not significant. These, notice all these are below 0.10, and for this study, you know, we're going to say that means we're really onto something. The farm families, notice the positive sign. A farm family is significantly more likely to have a garden, and we think that's because they know farming. You know, if you live out in the rural food desert and you're a school teacher, you drive into town to work, right? You teach physics at school, you might not have expertise in gardening. Okay? You drive in, you're a, you know, a dental hygienist, you drive in to work in the city, or you stay out there or in the country, there are schools there, you're a teacher there, or whatever, you don't have the expertise. The farm families have that expertise and they use it. This result shows they use that expertise. Look at the produce consumption, again, positive. We have, you know, the folks that ate more produce tend to be more likely to have a garden. Look at the age of respondent, and this is why I'm glad you asked that question about the age. It wasn't necessarily an income-age interaction, but look, highly statistically significant means that as the age of the respondent went up, the likelihood they have a garden goes down. And we had a lot of people talk to us, talk to our students when they did the phone surveys. There's a lot of seniors that say, I want a garden, I always had a garden. I broke my hip, I'm sick, I can't get out there and beat the ground. My kids are all gone, it's just me and my spouse. We don't garden. There was a lot of that. I was a little surprised, but that's why this came out negative. Higher age, lower chances, but it wasn't associated with income, but it was associated with age. Go ahead.
Well, that's good because that shows that younger kids do want to garden. And I was wondering if there were more older people gardening and not younger.
This is showing the opposite.
Yeah,
This is actually showing the opposite, a negative relationship. And a lot of it dealt with health, I think. Because remember, 74% have the gardens. So it's a vast majority, it's rural areas, a vast majority have, 3/4 have a garden. And the ones that don't tend to be seniors, or they tend to be people that don't come from a farm family. Or look at this one, look at the income, back to income. Look at the negative sign on income. And now that's income per capita in the house. Now, so think about that, income per capita in the house. That means as income goes up, gardening goes down. But in the denominator's number of people in the house. Okay, so as that goes up, likelihood of having a garden goes up. It's negative, but denominator. Woo, mathematics, right? More labor. If you've got 8 people in the house, right, you've got more labor available. You got mom and dad, a bunch of kids, or your niece and nephew living, you put them to work in the garden. This is significant. If it's just 2 people, you've got to get out there and beat the ground, especially if you're seniors. But this was very important. Larger households have higher likelihood. Now here's our prediction rate. Like if you plug in all those factors, if you plug in the factors and say, okay, we're going to go with a person that's predicted to do this based on income, number of people in the house, and so forth. Of the people that have a garden, observed, yes, have a garden. We predict that 57 out of the 59 who responded would in fact have a garden. We got those right, 57 out of 59. There's only 2 people that did have a garden that we predicted wouldn't. These, for example, might be, why would we have predicted that they didn't? Maybe it's because they don't have very many people in the house, and they're seniors, okay? But they're still healthy. And so we missed 2. Up here, the ones that say, observed, garden, no, I don't have a garden. We predicted that 12 would in fact not have a garden. But we predicted 10 would have a garden. So we got 12 out of 22, 55% success rate in prediction, 96%, 97%, and the yeses. So overall 85% is what we're hitting, is our accuracy of our model. So we know a lot more about why people do have a garden than why the people don't. There's some people in here that we really thought, they fit a profile, somebody that should have a garden, 10 of them, but for some reason they don't. Well, there's a lot of serendipity. Yeah.
Could you go back one slide to, maybe it's one more.
Okay.
So when you were predicting consumption, and let's just say you asked me the question, and I had a garden, and am I eating more fruits and vegetables? And I would say no, because I'm eating the same as I was. So therefore, if you're going to try to predict my gardening based on that, 50% of what I'm taking from my garden is actually, I buy 50%, I eat 50% from my garden. So how would you measure for me, because I would come up in the previous question of consumption as not increasing my fruits and vegetables. So I would answer that question and say, no, the gardening has not increased my fruit and vegetable consumption. I'm eating the same. My consumption is the same.
Right.
But I'm still, so in that next segment that you're asking, yes, 50% of what I garden is what I consume, but you would never capture that for me, because I answered initially in that one previous that it didn't, my fruit and vegetable consumption didn't increase.
Now, the study we did from Cleveland asked folks, has your fruit and veggie consumption increased? That was the community gardeners.
Right.
This one that we're doing in the rural area, we didn't ask because they're not in a gardening program. In other words, we asked them questions about their fruit and veggie consumption. This is just how much do you eat? How much, what are the sizes of your meals?
Increased.
No, we didn't.
How much do you eat?
Right,
Okay,
right.
okay.
And the reason why that is because remember the other one, we're asking people that are in a program, a community gardening program. And we ask, how long have you been in the program? Some of them 8 years, some of them 20 years, some of them it's their first year. And so the people that have been in for a while, we asked them, once you went in, did your fruit and veggie consumption change? Right? And for the people that had just come in and hadn't harvested yet, we said, now that you're in the program, do you think it will change? And we got all that kind of stuff. But on this one, we're asking people,
Just generally.
do you garden? How much fruit and veggies do you consume? But we didn't ask them how long they've been gardening, and so we don't have a change question in this survey.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
There is no.
Yeah.
Now what we did do here, we asked, okay, based on your current fruit and veggie consumption, we asked, okay, how much fruit and veggies do you consume? We asked that question, right? And we reported that. And then we asked them, do you have a garden? Just period, do you have a garden? And we found that the people that eat more fruit and veggies tend to have a garden. That positive sign, the more fruit and veggie consumption, it's more positively related with having a garden. But we don't have any dynamic thing here. On this one, it's not dynamic. That one was dynamic because it was a program. And here it's really not dynamic. It's just like do you or don't you.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just 1 minute, and then I want you to have your full time. What I handed out was what Extension uses to help our educators, and it just is to give Tom feedback on his teaching. We collect them, and then he gets a summary, so it is very important, if you don't mind, to fill that out. I know some of you are gonna have to leave, so do what you need to do, but we'll let Tom finish up. And if you didn't sign in when you came in, please sign in at the end before you leave.
Okay. Appreciate you filling those out. Let's see, we're almost done. See, we're at conclusions on the second study. That's a good sign. Was it that bad to sit through all those stats?
No.
Stats are fun, right? Just think about the students, that was their summer. It's like, this is your summer. You gotta actually design the survey, call these folks, go through all, they hang up on you and all this kind of stuff. And then when it's all over with that, you gotta enter the data into the computer and run the regressions and put the charts out. Oh man, that's summer work, right? Maybe they go work, some other thing, next time, working, splitting rocks or, chopping firewood or something, but they actually have a lot of fun, and we always enjoy having them. Okay, so 74% in the rural food desert have a garden, self-sufficiency is 22%, rural residents drive an average of 11 miles. Females and people with gardens eat more produce than other respondents. High-income households and seniors are less likely to have their gardens. There you go, on your income and the income and the age. Large households are more likely to grow their own food. So are farmers and people with low income. Look at all the references they had. They did a lot of literature review. And that's part of the scholarly thing. So I just want to say about OREP, our studies, first of all, in this particular case, I think both these studies have done a couple things for us. They get me invited to something like this to show you about how diverse communities in Ohio are facing this issue of food deserts. We all know nutrition is important. It's an issue faced by America. And I think it's a critical challenge in our future. So we're giving the members of the public, leaders, and so forth, a lot of these policymakers have to make decisions in those cities. Are we going to open up these gardens when we tear down these houses? This whole block's going to go, right? Because the houses are condemned. What are we going to do with that? Put up a parking lot or have a community garden? This is something that we give them to say there's a lot of benefits. All right. Acquaint students, our study, our ORIP program, acquaint student interns with principles and practices of applied research. Survey design implementation, all the stats, they have to learn all those regression. I make them learn the formulas to prove that the statistic is the right statistic and all this kind of stuff. It's a lot of calculus, a lot of algebra. It's just a blast. Wow, we're at the end already? I was just getting started. Wait a minute.
You can stay as long as you want.
That's me right there. But hey, if you have any questions, this is your chance. Yes, sir.
Clarity on definition of food desert. So if you have a 7-Eleven, that's just you have a retail availability of food.
Yes.
But if you have a 7-Eleven, selling Twinkies,
right,
beer, cigarettes, and drugs.
Food desert. That's a food desert.
That is a food desert.
That's a food. If that's your retail,
Yeah.
That's a food desert. That's what I'm saying. That's when I was in. Listen, here's how the way I came. Let me tell you what happened. Is that your definition too?
Yeah.
I'm not lying. I was in downtown Cleveland. I had to give a presentation one day, like I do here. I came here in Columbia. I was giving a presentation on something. Not this. We hadn't started this. I was giving a presentation on something on land use or Lake Erie Preservation and shoreline. And I stayed all night. I was down at a nice hotel downtown. So it's like 10:30, you know how I am. I was like, okay, I got a snack. So it's 10:30 at night. I'm giving a presentation next day. So I'm like, I go downstairs. So I walk around. And then I realized, well, I got to get in the car. So I drove like 12 blocks. There's a little convenience store, and I went in. And I'm like, the whole wall was Twinkies and stuff, potato chips and stuff, and candy bars. And I asked the woman, I said, don't you have anything in here healthy to eat? And she goes, I got an orange in my lunchbox. And so, okay, so then I drove around. This is a food desert. It's just the foods that are available are not healthy foods.
But sometimes they're called, when you have a cluster of that type, it's a food swamp.
Oh, tell me about that.
Well,
yeah.
that you have access to food, but the quality of that is not good. Whereas in a food desert, it's similar, like you have access, but it's you know, kind of limited as far as your transportation to and from and where it is, but a food swamp is defined as if you have this mecca of fast food and there's access, you can get food, but your choices are really.
From my understanding, the way we call this though, that would be, if a lot of times in that environment though, you've got sitting right in there somewhere, a Walmart that's a super Walmart, or a Bueller's, or a Giant Eagle, or something, and say what you want about those chains, they do sell a lot of healthy produce. You see what I'm saying? If they're there, I would say that's not a food desert. If they're not there, if it's all that in that swamp, whatever, and it's all just fast food around there, and there's no healthy alternatives, I would say it's a food desert. You see what I'm saying? Because food desert is not just the lack of retail food, stuff to put in your body with calories in it. It's a lack of healthy food options, you know, across the way the FDA defines with the food pyramid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think a food swamp is very similar to a food desert.
Okay.
It's just a cluster of areas.
A lot of
where
opportunities.
There's a lot of bad choices.
Bad choices. Okay.
In that way.
Interesting. Unfortunately, we got a lot of that in the U.S. You know, it's ubiquitous, isn't it? And what we've shown is like rural areas, urban areas, they face very similar challenges in having decent foods locally, you know, so.
Well, your focus was up in Cleveland too, and just, I mean, that, it happens here, I've written a paper on it.
Okay.
It's happening here, so, and it's surprising to me the amount of people that have no idea that a food desert is right here in their backyard.
Right in the backyard. I think that a lot of people were shocked when we came, this hit the local paper up there, and a lot of people were shocked. Because that's not that far from Worcester, you know? It's like 12, 15, 17, that corridor out there is like, you know, ranges between about 11 and 18 miles, and they're like, oh, you know, but I'm like, you guys that live in town, you're never more, inside Worcester, you're never more than like a mile and a half from a grocery store. And almost everybody in Worcester has a car, which means it's not a food desert. I mean, you've got a lot of opportunities. You can buy peaches, pears, any day of the week.
Is there any research done as to how many people are actually gardening who don't need to, who aren't in a food desert? Are those rates any different than those who are?
That's a great question. In other words, that 74% was the number we came up with. The people, 74% of the homes in the food desert, the rural food desert, had, you know, a garden. So the question would be, okay, what we need to do to find that answer is go survey a suburb where they got lots, and like, because everybody knows that a lot of people in suburbs have that. Like a suburb is close proximity, no grocery store is further than, say, 3 miles, and 98% of people have a car. That would not be a food desert. And do a percentage, you know, what percentage of people there have their own food, what's their self-sufficiency, and we haven't done that. I haven't done that, but you might be able to find that. Likely that kind of statistic is out there, and determine whether the people in that community, that kind of community, are less likely to have self-sufficiency. That'd be a good question to ask.
Any other questions for Tom? I'm sure he'll stick around, but let's give him a hand. Thank you
Thanks.
for coming.